Synopsis: in a glittering rooftop restaurant where money buys anonymity and sharp suits carve space from the air, a billionaire sneer ricochets into a waitress's life when he mocks her language in front of the room. Seconds later, she answers back in flawless, resonant Arabic, a response that is equal parts defiance, poetry, and memory. The story follows Layla, a quietly resolute waitress with a hidden past, and Karim Al-Hassan, a billionaire whose ego has been built on being unchallenged. A viral moment, a private confrontation, and a public reckoning spin out from that single instant, forcing both characters to confront what they have been pretending to be. Told in cinematic, sensory prose, the tale explores class, language, identity, and the cost of assumptions, and finds in a single exchange the possibility of dignity reclaimed in a bridge across two worlds that have forgotten how to listen. The lights at LaSalle made the city look like an ocean of pearls. From the rooftop terrace, the skyline bowed and glittered. Glass towers reflected one another like mirrors at a masquerade. Inside, the air smelled of lemon-polished wood and warm bread. Music hummed low beneath the murmur of conversation, a discreet soundtrack for people who had enough money to make their silences eloquent. Layla wiped a tray with practiced efficiency, feeling the grain of the oak through the cloth. She moved between tables the way a fish moves through water, fluid, aware of currents. Her apron not dug into the hollow of her back. Her hands, knuckles freckled with flour from the morning shift at the bakery next door, were steady. She liked the work because it made her necessary in small, immediate ways. A refilled glass, a steady chair for a jittering elbow, a smile for someone who had paid enough to be noticed. She liked it because it paid for the rent on her mother's house and the textbooks stuffed into her old backpack. Tonight was busy. A private table by the window hosted a man whose presence seemed to pull the light toward him, Karim Al-Hassan. He sat like a man who had practiced being central, legs crossed, cufflinks winking. He wore a suit the color of midnight and a watch that could finance her block. Around him clustered associates who laughed like cameras being primed. They spoke in the mellifluous, careful English of people accustomed to decisions. The table had ordered extravagance, shellfish glistening like small moons, wine with names she couldn't pronounce, a small sculpture of sugar the size of a child's fist. Layla served Karim his appetizer. He looked at her, briefly, the kind of look that catalogued age, accent, where the stain on a blouse might have come from, the exact shade of skin. She felt the glance as a brief ice. It didn't hate. She was used to glances. Some people assumed, with the ease of habit, that the person who fetched their napkin belonged to a lower planet of society's atlas. She had learned to be quick and small with such moments. They passed. "Excuse me," Karim said, theatrically polite. He set his spoon down and spoke to his friend in Arabic, the dialect of the very old money in old towns, clipped and luxurious, the kind of Arabic meant to remind the world of pedigree. He spoke with the casual cruelty of a man who catalogued and discarded. "Does she understand Arabic?" He smiled the way one smiles before pulling a lever, delighted at the idea of a creature flinching at a language that should be her anchor. The friend, tall, bearded, named Sameh, who provided the quick little laughs, turned to Layla. "Hey," he said warmly to be cruelly familiar. "You speak Arabic. Where are you from?" The table's laughter landed like a net. Heads craned around. Layla felt the air pick up, as though some invisible audience had been waiting for the moment to be entertained. Her pulse flicked in the rhythm of the kitchen timers behind her ribs, a brief 8-count of breath. Inhale, exhale. She had been taught by necessity to take nothing as personal that could spoil the night's work. She had learned to put a smile on, to tuck away the small rebellions until they were used as seeds for later. Her Arabic uncoiled under the cloth of her training. Words had lived inside her all her life. Her grandmother's lullabies, the calls of bakers at dawn, the phrase her mother used to steady her hands, yet she had not expected this particular strain of conversation to be the place her language would reveal itself. "Yes," she said in Arabic, leaning in just enough to be heard. Her voice was the quiet, clear kind of thing that made people listen. "Of course I speak Arabic. I speak the same Arabic my grandmother used to braid into our bread." The table tittered. Sammy offered an apologetic smile to Karim, as though he had been wrong to ask. Karim, enjoying the game, delivered the next Bob note. He switched smoothly to English with a trace of amusement for the rest of the room. He had the kind of charisma that could transform insult into entertainment. "Oh, which Arabic? From which souk?" Which village? From many, she said, and the phrase carried both pride and a certain exhaustion. Then she added something that confirmed neither his joke nor his assumption. She answered him in classical Arabic, not the slippery dialect of his party but the measured, resonant language that lives in books and ceremonies. Her vowels rounded like coins. From the city of Aleppo and from the books my father loved. I have family that recited the Quran at dawn. I have cousins who meddled in politics and sang at weddings. I speak the Arabic of kitchens and of old libraries, and, if you will, of the courts of speech. A hush dropped. The laughter paused as if someone had pressed a pause button. In the silence the restaurant seemed to expand. Lamps burned brighter as if cooperative. Faces that had been amused found their laughter stuck at the back of their throats. Karim's smile faltered. No one had expected that. He had expected fear, or at most a mumbled, embarrassed amusement. Not this porcelain voice that had the weight of lineage and the steadiness of someone who had spent a life listening to stories under heavy lids. Wow, Sameh breathed. Karim's ego bristled. Then, rather than melting, it reshaped itself. He liked to be undisputed. He had built empires with a particular ruthlessness, purchases that swallowed competitors, decisions made in corridors lined with portraits of men who had bent the world to them. To be invalidated in a roomful of his equals, by a woman whose most visible rebellion was her refusal to bow her head when she took plates, felt like a small abrasion on his authority. He leaned forward. The light caught the plane of his jaw. Ah, he said, as if tasting the word like a rare spice. You are educated, then. Aren't you a bit overqualified for this line of work? The question was meant to be gentle and penetrating, like a probe into the seams where a person's life can be tugged. Overqualified. It was a word meant to close the distance with pity. But Layla heard it as if it had been the wrong key inserted into a lock. She set the tray down with care, the tin of cutlery chiming like a bell. Her palm smelled faintly of citrus and yeast. She could feel the weight of each face, some expectant, others pleased at the entertainment, some indifferent. There was also Maya's small, encouraging look, Maya, who worked the same shift and had walked with Layla through nights when the cafe's owner tried to shortchange their wages. Maya mouthed, not loudly but with wide eyes. Keep cool. You could say I'm overqualified for many things, Layla answered, keeping the cadence even. For waiting on tables, yes, perhaps. But I'm not ashamed of work. There is honor in bread and in keeping a place warm for strangers. Work feeds a soul discreetly. Her words landed not as defiance but as precision. She had the habit of making sentences that fit, like a tailor makes a sleeve. A few in the room nodded. The idea that dignity could be worn like a garment had currency in certain circles. Karim, however, felt the needle in his hand. He did not like the seam to be so neat. That's very noble of you, he said with a tone that was a sculpted smile. But we live in the age of specialization. People don't usually have time to, what's the word, have pasts and futures. The words were small stones thrown at a window. Layla surprised herself by answering simply, we all have pasts. Some of us have to carry them. There was a softness under her words, a reveal of fatigue. It was the fatigue of someone who had moved a mother's bed in the small hours, paid a landlord with 2 fingers' width of a paycheck, argued with a university about contested bursaries. It was the fatigue of a life stitched with small, precise acts of survival and love. The table, filled with people who paid for privacy and controlled conversation, had assumed she existed only as a blade to be turned. Karim's face, momentarily open, smoothed into a mask of curiosity and challenge. And which university did you attend? What did you study? If your Arabic is so composite, you must have read widely. Layla thought of the nights she had spent hunched over borrowed books, scraping for knowledge in the margins of older people's generosity. She thought of her father's hands, the small, calloused hands that had taught her to listen, and of the smell of cardamom in a kitchen at dawn where debates over politics had been waged with teacups. She might have told him about the scholarship she had lost, about the family that had needed bread, about the smugness that paid for its own fashion. But she also knew that the moment had the potential to be a spectacle or an opening. I studied comparative literature, she said. I loved narratives, the ones people told in their homes and the ones scholars wrote about. I like languages because they are maps of how people get from one hurt to another and find a way to leave the hurt at the shore. The table exhaled in pulses. Someone by the next table cleared their throat as if to restore the original plan of amusement. Cameras and phones were already half-raised. These days, a public moment was a raw material for 15 seconds of attention. "Ah," Karim said. He adopted, for a second, a posture he used when he wanted to offer patronage. "And now, what are your plans? You could do so much. We invest in people like you." Maya's hand brushed Layla's wrist under the linen. The brush was both a warning and a benediction. Layla's jaw tightened a fraction. This was the moment people often expected to end with a handshake and a signed check. She had danced this dance before in the unlit spaces of small charities and well-meaning dinners. Offers were often thinly veiled attempts to buy a story or to score a moral dividend at cocktail parties. "Thank you," she said, and her voice held the dignity of refusal wrapped in politeness. "But I prefer to be asked what I want, not be told." The group shifted. Karim, who had never been refused in a way that did not produce later concessions, felt a loop of coldness. He was not used to being told no so cleanly. He had the impulse to assert dominance, to render the refusal into a concession of curiosity. "Why are you working here then?" he asked, softer. Layla's mind flicked to the flat with its single electric fan, the stack of textbooks on the second shelf, her mother's sleeping breath like a clock. She saw the months when banks refused the loan her mother needed, the days when their landlord's patience had been a soft, fraying rope. She might have answered with a tale of necessity, but there was a clearer truth shaped from the bones of every small rebellion. She wanted to be known on her own terms. "I'm here because my mother's health costs money and because I like being part of a room that keeps its warmth," she said. "But mostly, I'm here because not all of us can be at the center of cities like yours. Someone has to keep the lights on while the others make decisions." Her answer carried no apology. It carried a map. In a voice real enough to ache, she said something that surprised even her. "And because I choose it when I can't choose everything else." Someone at the table whispered something in English, aghast or amused. Layla couldn't tell. But the phones around them had opened the gate. A young man at the bar had already uploaded a clip titled "Billionaire mocked Waitress" in Arabic. Seconds later she answered back fluently. Within an hour, the clip would have more views than the restaurant had patrons that night. The first war of responses took place in Karim's face. He had not anticipated virality. His world was private jets and closed rooms, not the intimate, Shakespearean theater of social media. Yet here he was, captured mid-ego and in the act of being humbled by a girl in an apron. Later that night, Karim couldn't sleep. His penthouse offered views of the city that could have distracted an eagle. Instead, his mind skittered over the evening like light over water. He found himself replaying the moment when Layla had answered in Arabic. He found he heard not only the syllables but the cadence, precise, dignified. He felt an unfamiliar prick, regret, perhaps, but also a curious admiration, like a man discovering an instrument he had not known he wanted to learn to play. The clip had multiplied. Commentaries sprung up. Some praised her sharp wit and refusal to be diminished. Others framed her as a symbol of a hidden dignity. A few of Karim's cohorts laughed it off. "Video of the week," they said, then clicked to the next distraction. But the internet has the economy of the relentless. Layla's words found people who needed the reassurance that work could be noble. They found scholarship students, single parents, and old women who had once carried trays. Layla's story became a mirror. And mirrors have a way of showing not only faces but also the hands that hold them. Karim called his PR team at dawn. He demanded clarity and control. He wanted to know who had filmed it, whether it had been edited, what the market reaction was. He had the financial tools to blunt outrage with donations if necessary. He could, he reasoned, retract his misstep with currency. But currency is a blunt instrument when the currency that has been bruised is a person's dignity. Karim felt something else angling inside him. A strange compulsion to meet Layla, to see the face that had undone him. He told himself it was curiosity. He told himself it was a wish to offer restitution. In the slow, private hours, he imagined the scene again and let it sink like an ice cube in a glass of brandy. He went to LaSalle the next evening in person. He told the concierge he wanted to apologize. The concierge offered the stage pathways. The kitchen would manage a meeting, a discreet table, a careful conversation. Karim had paid for discretion countless times. For the first time, his money did not seem adequate. Layla was scheduled for the late shift and had already walked the city 2 buses and a storybook away from the day's chaos. Her feet ached in a way honest work rewards. Maya, who had a sly streak and an older sister's instincts, watched the way Layla tied it and said, "If he tries anything, I flip his steak." "Keep your hands to yourself," Layla muttered, smiling. She felt strangely calm. There was a clarity that had settled in her bones like a pledge. When Karim arrived, he walked with a different gait than the wealthy patrons he usually encountered at the restaurant, tentative, raw at the edges. He asked for Layla by name, which surprised the manager. "Why, hey?" the manager asked as if in formal curiosity. "Because I owe her an apology," Karim said. "And perhaps because I want to hear more." The manager sent a message. Layla's stomach did not drop in the way a novice's might. Instead, a quiet readiness opened. She had rehearsed neither apology nor acceptance in her mind. She had only rehearsed the art of keeping a face that had meaning in more than one register. They sat in a corner where the light was soft and forgiving. Karim had left his watch in the car. He sat across from her, with a cup of coffee between them like a truce. The room hummed. Waiters moved like seasons. "I'm Karim Al-Hassan," he began. "There are moments when a name is both shield and confession. I'm sorry for how I treated you last night." Layla could see the sincerity loose in his hands. His fingers tapped the table with a nervous pattern. She could see also the workings behind his apology, calculations about public perception, about damage control. She accepted the apology as a human offered it and as an oligarch had rendered it. "Thank you," she said. "I accept it." Karim inhaled as if relieved. "You were incredible," he said. "Not because of the language, though that's remarkable, but because you made something plain in a way I didn't want to be made plain. I'm not used to being in my corner." Layla expected some sort of moralizing. Instead, Karim's confession was stripped and unexpectedly honest. "People have always been courteous to me when I am convenient. I wanted to be amusing, and I forgot I was human." He paused and then, as if trying on a thought, asked, "Why didn't you tell me more about yourself? Why did you give just enough?" "Because you took enough without asking," she answered. "And because I prefer to be the narrator of my own story, not a footnote in your entertainment." A laugh escaped him, unmoored and genuine. "Fair enough," he said. They talked then in a way that was both awkward and real, two people from different costuming of life exchanging the currency of memory. Layla spoke of nights when the bakery closed late, and the smell of cinnamon became the only thing that marked time. She told him of a scholarship that had been revoked because a distant relative had made a political misstep. She told him of the way her mother ate olives at midnight and hummed lines of an old song. Karim listened like someone discovering a country on a map, where lines didn't belong to him. As the conversation unfurled, Karim confessed that power had been his armor and privilege, the way a boy puts on a cape to feel invincible against a world he fears. "My father taught me to never show weakness," he said. "In the boardroom, in the markets. But sometimes, at dinner with friends, I forget that other people's vulnerabilities are not blank pages for my amusement." Layla studied him. She could see the small, human creases beneath his tailored suit. The person who spent money to fill silences, the man who occasionally read poetry to feel his edges soften. She saw also a capacity for mischief that, left unchecked, had wounded people. She did not forgive him as a gift. She offered a measured dismantling of his arrogance. "There's a difference between charity and responsibility," she said. "You can give someone a check and congratulate yourself. Or you can make it so that the systems that force people to work 2 jobs to survive are different. One buys a night's applause, the other changes the melody." Karim's eyes narrowed as if considering exactly what melody she had proposed. "And what would you do if you had the resources?" he asked. "If you had a place to teach, to help those who can't afford tuition, to—" Layla's mind filled with an image she had sketched on the back of a menu one long night. A small library at the center of a neighborhood, battered chairs and bright rugs, a sign over the door that read "Open to all." She pictured students who might not have to put their heads down to servers in order to keep their families afloat. A place where the language of their ancestors could be a bridge, not a reason to be mocked. "I'd open a community center," she said softly. "A place not to save people but to give them the tools they deserve. Books, tutoring, a safe table where you can talk and not be judged because of your job. A place to teach languages, to teach people how to handle the city's edges. A place where dignity is the default." Karim listened. The idea appealed to his sense of scale. empire building and service, rather than extraction. It also touched a deeper chord. He had long adopted the language of philanthropy as a public stage, but the thought of a project that demanded time and humility intrigued him. "Would you run it?" he asked. Layla smiled in a way that was not quite a yes. "I wouldn't run it alone. I'd make sure the people from the neighborhood decide what they need. I'd make sure it's not a monument to my taste, and not to yours. It should be a place where those who have been serving the city can be students and teachers." Karim felt sudden warmth, a hunger that didn't feel like hunger for control. It was something like the belief that money used rightly could remake a small corner of a city. He imagined, with a clarity he had not felt in years, a building lined with books and the murmur of study. "Let's do it then," he said. The words surprised both of them. What followed was not immediate triumph, but a complicated negotiation of ideals and ego. Karim attempted to use his resources. Layla insisted on community representation, and together they navigated a bureaucracy that did not like being appended. Maya became an ally, organizing flyers and hosting the first fundraising night. Karim learned to speak in meetings he did not dominate, listening in a way that felt strange at first. He endured questions he could not answer with numbers. The project opened not with trumpets but with a small ribbon and cookies shaped like letters. People came because they needed the air of books and the possibility that their children could study past midnight without fear. The center's first tutor was a retired schoolteacher who smelled of chalk and orange peel. Layla taught a night class in which the grammar of modern life was mixed with classical poems, and students spilled their stories in the margins. The center did not erase the city's divides, nor did it absolve Karim of his past cruelties. But it created a space where class and language found an intersection that was less a battleground and more a workshop. It made room for dignity. Months later, at a modest celebration for the center's first anniversary, Karim watched Layla as she arranged chairs with the same care she had once set down plates. He saw how she laughed with students, how the children clustered around her as if she were a son. He thought of the motel of his memory where his father had taught him that power must be shown. He thought of the way apology had been the first, messy doorway through which both of them had to pass. "Do you regret mocking me?" Layla asked him once, long after the cameras had left the restaurant and the viral clip had grown into a legend that strangers told to their friends. Karim considered the question. Regret, he decided, was a small, tidy thing. What he felt was a messy palette of things: shame, humility, and the sudden understanding that being wealthy does not inoculate one from the necessity of learning. "I regret that I made you small to make myself feel big," he said. "And I regret that I had to be embarrassed to notice." He looked at her over the paper lanterns. "But I don't regret meeting you. You made me learn to be something other than what I've been taught." Layla smiled, and the smile was a small, careful miracle. "We both learned to listen," she said. "But listen well, Karim. People are not projects. You can help, and you can step back. You can also, sometimes, sit down and be a student." He nodded. "I will be a student." The city continued to glitter like an ocean of pearls. LaSalle still hosted men who could buy islands. Yet the viral clip that had once been a moment of humiliation had become a point of change in small lives. A scholarship awarded to a student who had been the first in her family to study. A retired teacher who volunteered on weekdays and told the center's children stories that were older than the buildings. A bank that offered microloans with dignity embedded in their contracts. The change was slow and patchwork and sometimes infuriatingly insufficient, but it was real. Layla continued to work shifts at LaSalle for a time, by choice. She liked the rhythm of the place. People still sometimes expected her to be smaller than she was. Sometimes they apologized. Sometimes they did not. Her life grew wider in vocabulary and in food and in the stubborn sense that there is a particular holiness to being both generous and restrained. Karim, too, found himself altered in small, concrete ways. He stopped making jokes that turned other people's truths into a show. His board meetings included more listening than pronouncement. Sometimes he attended the center and sat in the back of a classroom, a silent student struggling with the irregular verbs of humility. The last scene in this small, unromantic novel of two worlds is a winter evening when Layla and Karim walk along the river's path beside the center. The lights shimmered on water the color of ink. Layla's scarf was tighter than the air needed. He could see the small angles of her jaw as she laughed. There was a street musician playing a song that had been sung in the city for generations. Children ran past them, hands sticky with candy. "It is strange," Kareem said, looking at the stream. "I thought money could fix everything." "No," Layla said. "It buys a lot, but not everything. It cannot buy history or courage or the right to tell your own story." "Can you teach me to be more than a purchaser?" he asked, half joking. Layla looked at him, her expression easing with something like affection. "Learning is better when you don't pay for it," she said. "But since you insist, we'll start with reading aloud. Then we'll mend the rest." He laughed then, an unguarded sound, and they walked on, two figures framed by the city's light and the stubborn conviction that, in language and in life, a person could answer back and, by doing so, change the shape of a world.